This is the Guns Magazine podcast, episode number 13. Hi there, and welcome to the Guns Magazine podcast. I'm your host and the editor of Guns Magazine, Brent. Thanks for joining us as we talk to the interesting people who make up the world of shooting, hunting, and the firearms industry. This is a very special episode, number 13, ironically, and I'm going to make a one-time turn while covering some thoughts on the ongoing coronavirus pandemic. You know, we always try to keep things light and fun here on the Guns Magazine podcast, but this is a serious topic potentially affecting everyone, so I hope you'll forgive me if I include fewer booger jokes than normal. As I said, fewer, but not none. Above all, let me remind you that none of what I'm about to say should be considered medical or legal advice. I'm not a medical expert or epidemiologist or a lawyer. Before you act on any of these suggestions, please check first with your doctor, religious advisor, life coach, lawyer, local banker, and heating and cooling professional. Do not spindle, fold, or mutilate. Your mileage may vary, and the offer is void in New Hampshire. So, you may ask why I'm qualified to host a podcast on the subject, and that's a fair question. First off, I've been a self-reliance writer and practitioner for decades. When I'm talking about long-term food and water storage, I've done it long enough to know the aroma of a rotting MRE in your basement, and I've experienced the joys of discovering your carefully tended water storage barrels are filled to the brim with green slime. Moreover, I've been in law enforcement for 3 decades, and I grudgingly had a local elected official on and off for years. A big part of my job has been to continually worry about every possible bad thing that could happen and to develop plans to meet those challenges. I've thought about and written response plans for everything from a July 4th parade mass casualty event to long-term loss of electrical power. No plan is perfect, but I will say that trying to figure out how to keep government services running through a long-term natural disaster really causes you to look at daily life differently. And on gun topics, well, I hope I've earned some level of expert status at this point in time. Finally, on a personal level, I have several family members and many friends who fall into high-risk groups for this illness, so I am concerned about making sure they remain safe. Since this is a firearms podcast, we'll talk about guns, but first let me hit the big overarching topic, which is don't panic. I know it's easy to say don't panic, but that's what we really all need right now. Fortunately, when I consider our regular audience for the Guns Magazine podcast, I think I'm kind of preaching at the choir. Our readers are more experienced than your average YouTube influencer, and I think less prone to fly off the handle when life takes a hard right turn. This means if you listen to this podcast and don't really hear anything new, make sure you take your expertise and become a teacher and leader for your friends, family, and community. We need calm, thoughtful, informed leadership more than ever, and this is a great time for Guns and American Handgunner family members to rise to the occasion. Now let me share a couple of thoughts on how to avoid getting or staying freaked out as this crisis runs its course. First, as of this recording, there have been 100 fatalities from the virus. When you consider heart disease killed nearly 650,000 Americans last year and cancer had killed nearly that many, the odds of succumbing to this virus are still statistically insignificant, especially when you remember the U.S. population is right around 327 million people, give or take. And if you don't fall into a high-risk category, your odds are even less. Moreover, many folks who catch the virus only have mild to moderate symptoms. So if you're watching the news like it's your job, please stop. Speaking as a media professional, in today's environment, it's more important than ever to catch people's attention, so rest assured nobody, except us, is downplaying the significance of the problem. You know, so far my favorite over-the-top headline was CBS News last night, which had a story on their website which shouted, "Your phone could be harboring coronavirus." Well, that's technically accurate, but I could also write an equally plausible story saying your phone could be harboring tuberculosis or tiny evil magical elves. Remember, anytime a news headline uses the word could or might, it's simply an opinion masquerading as hard news. Speaking as a longtime government employee and elected official who spent considerable time in front of a TV camera making official announcements, remember that no official wants to be seen as a government employee who downplayed an emergency. If this virus does eventually turn out as bad as some people claim it will, no official wants to be seen on a video shrugging it off as no big deal. This means officials also always talk about worst case rather than best case scenarios. When you add in politics and the constant struggle for funding, there are plenty of reasons why you'll never see a public official go on camera and say, it's not a big deal, everything's going to be fine. Now, in terms of medical care, keep in mind there are, according to the latest official statistics that I looked up myself, 924,000 hospital beds in the U.S. and 97,776 intensive care beds. Italy, by the way, with 60 million people, has about 5,000 intensive care beds, and it was quickly overwhelmed by those in respiratory distress. The percentage of overall hospital beds in the U.S. compared to the population is lower than some other developed countries, but what some of the media doomsayers fail to mention is the U.S. has a booming outpatient surgery industry, so many procedures that used to involve a hospital stay are also now done via drive-through, so to speak. The U.S. healthcare system could, now there's that word again, become overwhelmed if things get as bad as some claim, but our system is also remarkably large and resilient. So, just to reiterate, check the news once or twice a day, take it with an enormous grain of salt, then go about your business. On a related note, here's a very important and simple thing to remember. Any advice or information you get via social media is likely to be 112% false. In fact, the more legitimate and authoritative the post appears, the higher the likelihood it's a work of outstanding fiction. I've almost been taken in by one or two of these myself, but fortunately I didn't break my rule of always fact-checking anything on social media. Social media is fun, but don't use it as a source of critical information. Facebook will probably hunt me down for saying that, but it's absolutely true. As far as food hoarding and all that, if you find yourself panic buying food, you've failed as a self-reliant human. You should always have an emergency stash of food, water, medication, and hard cash on hand because most crises don't really start up as slowly as this one. It also doesn't hurt to remember that most folks have at least 2 weeks or more of food on hand in their pantry. You might end up eating artichoke casserole or peanut butter lasagna, but it's highly unlikely you're going to starve. You might be hungry, but that's not starvation. And as far as water goes, I don't understand why people are stockpiling bottled water. Apparently folks think the virus attacks copper pipes. I don't get it, and I really believe that's just pure panic. I'll share one thing I've noticed, which I think is absolutely hilarious. I've been to several stores lately and noticed something. Nobody wants to be seen as a hoarder, so what they do is approach the water or toilet paper, look around like they're getting ready to shoplift, then they quickly grab as much as they can. They then scurry away so nobody's going to see them. If you feel embarrassed about buying supplies, that's a good indication you need to spend some time on planning and preparation. So basically, let this all be a lesson. You should always have a couple of weeks of non-perishable food, water, medicine, and cash on hand to survive whatever happens, be it hurricane, tornado, personal crisis such as a job loss, or even the latest end of the world as we know it, pandemic. There's plenty of great resources available so you can learn more, but remember, preparedness should be a lifestyle rather than something you shift into when a crisis strikes. In that regard, I'll also add that it shouldn't be an all-consuming lifestyle either. Just do it, but don't wear preparedness on your sleeve like a badge of honor. It's not cool. And now, let's talk about guns. Okay, here's the bad news. If you're buying your first gun in response to coronavirus, you're way, way, way behind the curve. It's been said that owning a piano doesn't make you a musician, and owning a firearm doesn't make you a gunfighter. Yeah, you might feel a little better about your personal safety holding that new pistol, but it's mostly a false sense of security. That's because, in a real crisis, you'll likely over or perhaps underreact, and not only fail to protect yourself, you'll probably do something you'll regret. Here's my suggestion. If you're really worried about self-defense, carry a baseball bat or a big stick. You can do good work if necessary, plus there's a nice deterrent effect, but you're also less likely to kill yourself, a family member, or some non-deserving third party. I love guns and all things shooting, plus I encourage everyone to own firearms, but they are dangerous if used improperly, so training and long-term practice is critical. I saw a recent national media interview where a 22-year-old woman bought a .22 caliber revolver because she was afraid of looters. Of course, the reporter didn't have a clue as to anything regarding firearms and was trying to make the young lady look bad overall for buying a gun and was really using it as a metaphor for the insanity of panic buying. The young lady wasn't bad, but she was seriously misguided. if you are looking for advice in the face of looters, let me just say a .22 revolver can be used for self-defense, but it's an expert's gun with serious limitations. If the gun store clerk really had this lady's best interests at heart, he would have recommended she buy a shotgun. The manual of arms is generally simpler, they're less likely to cause self-inflicted damage, and they're quite a bit more effective at close ranges. What most buyers don't realize is handguns are a weapon you carry when you can't carry anything else. They're not a magic talisman that will stop a horde of angry looters in their tracks, and in fact, even a shotgun or rifle won't likely have that desired effect. Plus, there's the added benefit of you'll be arrested for menacing if the people aren't actively trying to kill you at the moment. To reiterate the past few minutes, guns are a great thing, but not in the hands of the inexperienced. Fortunately, there's a solution. Don't be inexperienced. Take your new gun, get some professional training, keep practicing regularly, and go on to enjoying everything about firearms from a position of understanding and competence. Oh yeah, and also subscribe to Guns Magazine American Handgunner. So that's my quick personal take on the current pandemic. It's a serious problem, but the vast majority of us will survive just fine. Most of us will be inconvenienced, some of us will face serious medical or financial problems, and unfortunately, statistically, a few might depart from this vale of tears, but in the end, as the song says, the sun will come up tomorrow. And when it does, Guns Magazine will be there with a new issue covering all the great stuff in the world of shooting, hunting, and the firearms industry. With that, I hope you found something useful in this special edition of the Guns Magazine podcast. Please check out all of our other entertaining episodes, and please tell all of your friends, even the liberals. Guns Magazine is #1 in the business, and we're using our decades of friendships to bring you the most interesting chats in the gun world. If you have questions, comments, or a guest you'd like to recommend for the show, please email me. That's editor@gunsmagazine.com. Make sure you don't miss out on anything by subscribing to us on your favorite podcast directory and YouTube. Of course, you can always listen and download our episodes at gunsmagazine.com. While you're at it, don't forget to check out our sister publication, the great American Handgunner magazine, at americanhandgunner.com. That's it for this episode of the Guns Magazine podcast. For the entire crew at FMG Publications, I'm Guns Magazine editor Brent Wheat. Now, stay safe, get out there, and get shooting.